All right, baseball family, welcome back to part 2 of our book club. For those of you that may be joining us just now, we're reading Fair Ball by Bob Costas. It's a fan's case for baseball. And we got into chapters 4, 5, and 6 this past couple of weeks. And there's a number of things going on here that I found really interesting. But ultimately, let's just jump through chapter 4 really quick. What he's advocating for in chapter 4, say that 5 times fast, is revenue sharing program, right? Bob Costas is saying that the economic system as it was built in 1999 is broken, and that it was creating and would continue to create a competitive imbalance, which is something we've talked about a billion times on this podcast, and something we will probably continue to talk about as the competitive imbalance remains unchecked. Wouldn't you say that's still the case, Brad?
No, I would not, actually.
Wow, outstanding.
I've been thinking a lot about this the last few days. We'll get into it in a minute, but go ahead and keep going.
So what he's saying is he makes some interesting comparisons between Major League Baseball, the National Football League, and the NBA, the National Basketball Association. And I thought the one that was the most compelling comparison to the NBA was saying that he actually highlights Sacramento, Portland, Indianapolis, and Salt Lake City. And he says that it's laughable to consider a Major League Baseball team being successful in any of those markets. Do you agree with that, Brad?
I actually do absolutely agree with that. I honestly think that in today's sports economic environment, I don't think that an NBA team would actually be put in Salt Lake or in Portland or in Sacramento for that matter. That those teams are only there because they've been there and they're established. That nobody in their right mind would bring a team into those places today in today's environment.
Right. Yeah.
And it's not so much just a baseball team in those places. It's sports in general. Like I've seen people on Facebook being like, oh, because you and I both we have family connections in Utah, and people are like, oh, we need to bring Major League Baseball to Utah, bring it to Salt Lake. And like, no, it would fail. Wouldn't even last
miserably
a year.
And
it'd
immediately.
Be worse than the pilots.
Yeah.
So
well, it shocks me that the Real Salt Lake Major League Soccer is at all successful. Like at all.
I think the reason that is successful is because it's a smaller league. That they got in relatively early on in the league, right?
Yep.
And were able to establish. If MLS gets as big as even the NHL or Major League Baseball or the NBA, we won't even compare it to the NFL just because it's a monster. But if it were to get as big as the NHL or Major League Baseball, that the only reason Real Salt Lake will be able to stay viable is because it's established. They wouldn't be able to expand to Salt Lake because of the same reason. There's getting to be more and more corporate, right? Corporate sponsorship opportunities there to support those teams.
For sure.
But at the same time, like how many of those companies actually want to buy into those boxes to help support the team?
Because the box seating is a huge part of the revenue, and we're going to get into that a little bit because he breaks it down into 3 categories. Bob Costas does. He's talking about the gate as a revenue source, which includes everything involving a ticket. Doesn't matter what level of seating. It doesn't matter where you are in the stadium. Anything involving a ticket, to include the executive boxes and some of the more franchise or some of the higher end suites and the cushy seats behind home plate, stuff like that, all counts as gate. Okay, and then he's talking about broadcast revenues as part 2. That's national TV contracts and local contracts, as well as MLB licensed merchandise that is not sold in the stadium. He's counting among those. And then stadium revenue itself. So stadium revenue is anything generated when folks are at the ballpark. So he says this is concessions, on the ground souvenir buying, etc. Face paint for the kid if there's a cost associated, things like that. So all of that those are the 3 major revenue streams that he discusses. And he does, since this was pre-internet, he does discuss, which I thought was astonishing. I'm listening and reading, at different points, and I'm like, whoa. He even mentions, and once the internet gets going, just you wait, because that's going to be another part of this revenue stream that the broadcasters are going to have to deal with. And I was like, holy crap. So anyway, it was really interesting. So the gate, broadcast revenues and stadium revenues. Brad, which one do you think is the most important for these teams, and where do they have the tightest chokehold?
What do you mean tightest chokehold? As far as like
the owners do not want to they just don't want to let go.
Oh, probably I would say the gate, but for some of those places it's not that big. But it's probably going to be the TV rights, because that is huge. It is huge. Like the Mariners get $100 million from Root Sports every year.
Exactly.
That's a lot of money.
And they are sharing, as of right now, they are sharing the gates with the away team, right?
No, he said that they changed that in the 95 collective bargaining agreement, that it used to be 80-20, and then they got rid of it. Now it's 100% for the teams.
100% the home team.
Yeah, and this is the thing, is that he talks about the revenue sharing with these things, and it makes perfect sense, because he's like, you cannot play a game unless you have another major league team to play with.
Right.
Like the Yankees playing an inter-squad scrimmage are not going to get
Nobody
that's
cares.
not going to get the same draw. Like people like you and I, we would definitely go to that game just because it's fun, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like we go to spring training games because it's fun.
Yeah.
But the games have no meaning. It's just we want to get our fix for baseball. We want to get out in the sun. We want to eat sunflower seeds and walk around those tiny little stadiums and get close to the game. But if they were to say in say August, we're going to take a couple weeks off, but teams are still going to scrimmage in Arizona and Florida, nobody would go. No chance. I don't care if Arizona's not 120 degrees in August. Right. Nobody's going to those games.
You're 100% right.
But it's the draw of two major league teams, and so it makes sense to me for him to be like, so you need to split that revenue. You need to split the gate. I'm like, absolutely. You should be splitting the gate.
And the NFL splits it 60-40 at the gate. They take all of the gate and they split it 60-40.
And it helps with the NFL that they sell out probably 95% of their games because there's so few of them.
Right. What is it? 16 games or something like
17
that? 15
games?
17
games now. Yeah.
So there's 17 games, and Major League Baseball's sporting 162, and they don't sell out every time.
Right. Rarely, I feel like.
Yeah, but when the Yankees come to Arizona, or when the Dodgers come to Arizona,
Phoenix, the Dodgers in Phoenix is a big deal around here.
The Dodgers in Phoenix is a huge deal, right? There are far more tickets sold when the Dodgers come than there are when I don't know, anybody else, probably.
When the Phillies were in town on a weeknight, there was nobody there.
And I've seen the Cubs play there a couple of times, and there's a lot of Cubs fans.
Yeah.
More.
Yeah, there are certain teams that travel well, and I feel like you're going to get that everywhere.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, the Phillies playing in Arizona was not a big deal.
And the reason I bring up the Yankees is because with this new model that they're going to start rolling out with lots more interleague play, then we're going to find out what that looks like.
Right.
And that'll be really interesting to see because the Yankees travel well, right? So he goes on to explain in Chapter 4 all of the disparities of payroll. Obviously, payroll is directly lined and tied to revenue. And he says that in 95, Atlanta had the 4th highest payroll. Cleveland had the 7th highest, and they were in the World Series, right? 96, Yankees, Braves, 1st and 3rd payrolls. 97, Marlins, 5th payroll. Indians 3rd. 98, the Yankees in 2nd place as far as payroll. Swept the Padres with their 10th in payroll. So he's arguing that the teams that make it to the World Series are always in the top 10 payroll across the league. And payroll is directly tied to revenue capabilities, right? So what Costas is arguing for is a revenue share that allows smaller market teams and even small to mid-market teams the opportunity to be competitive in their spending, to bring in players and put up a fight so that they're not beginning the season with near to any chance of success, which he then goes on to argue the fans can sense, right? And we are very capable as a fan base of saying, excuse me, I'm not going to any of those games, right? Like we saw this in Baltimore in the 22 season, right? Baltimore, until they started winning, there was nobody there. It was crickets. Same thing happened in Oakland. As the season progressed, we saw the team sold fewer and fewer tickets.
Right. Yep.
It doesn't matter who comes to play, because I've seen New York play in Oakland, and there were a boatload of Yankees fans in Oakland. Way, way too many for being that far away. But the A's benefited from that series financially.
Right.
The Yankees not at all. Right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, the Yankees are just like the traveling circus when it comes to the gate right now.
Thank you.
And it makes, like I said, it makes sense to share revenue. But this is my thing, is that I feel like it's a fallacy to say that because you cannot build a winning team financially, or because you cannot pay your team a bunch of money, like, you cannot be successful. So here's the thing. This is while you're doing all this, I was looking because I meant to do this earlier, but I forgot. So Major League Baseball has when it comes to championships, has the most parity of any league, any professional sports league, among the big three in the U.S. between the NBA, MLB, and NFL. MLB has had 16 different winners since 2001.
Right.
Okay. The NFL has had 13 different winners since 2001. Ooh. The NBA has only had 8.
Oh.
It's been the Heat, the Lakers, the Warriors, the Celtics, the Spurs, and then a couple more peppered in there, like the Raptors won one, and then the Mavericks won one.
Mm-hmm.
That's 7. That's 7 right there, just off the top of my head. I can't think of the 8th one, but like, that's like the NBA. I'm saying, I've been crying forever. Like, the NBA has a salary cap figured out. No, the NBA does not have the salary cap figured out. Like, they have they have a revenue sharing plan across the league. Like, they have a split with the players, saying like players get 48% of the revenue, owners get 52% of the revenue, or whatever it is. Like, they have all that. They have a salary floor. They have a salary cap. They have things to help keep players at their team, to help them stay with the team that drafted them, develop them, everything like that. But it still does not work with league parity. The thing that works with league parity is financial parity, apparently. Because I don't know. I'm sorry if I'm getting ahead of myself, but I've been thinking about this a lot as I was reading this. That, first off, one of the things I thought was funny is that Costas was like contradicting himself with in the first chapter. He's complaining about the Indians and the Marlins in the World Series.
Yeah.
And then he's saying, but you need to be able to get these teams in the World Series. Like, well, you don't want them, but so why are you arguing anyway?
Yeah.
But
that's true.
So there's that. But at the same time, though, what this financial disparity has done is it has forced teams to build teams the way they're meant to be.
Right.
Are there teams that are buying all the free agents? Of course, absolutely. The Yankees have done it since the beginning of time. The Pirates used to do it. That's why they have the name that they do. The Mets are doing it right now, right?
Yeah.
And apparently the Padres are doing it, and the Rockies take umbrage with it. But the teams that are winning World Series, the Royals won a World Series, and not only that, they appeared in back-to-back World Series with homegrown talent. The Astros have, I don't want to say created a dynasty, but they've dominated the American League over the last 6 years with homegrown talent.
Yeah.
The Rays are notorious for using homegrown talent and not paying anybody.
Right.
And they've been contenders in the AL East, arguably the most competitive division in Major League Baseball.
Yep.
For almost a decade now. It's funny that, on the surface, we all want the salary cap and we all want revenue sharing and to like level the playing field. But in reality, the thing that's leveling the playing field and making things more competitive is not having a salary cap, not having a level field financially, because it comes down to the teams that want to compete. The A's are not developing players and they're not making a competitive team. They could be the Rays of the West Coast. They could be.
They were. They used to be.
Mm-hmm. They used to be.
They already did that. So my question is to you, Brad, how do you incentivize these owners and these ownership groups, whether they're corporate or private, right? Ownership. How do you incentivize the people pulling the strings if it's not salary cap and it's not revenue sharing to build these teams competitively? What do you got to do?
You would think that playoff shares would be what would do it, right?
You would think.
But I don't know. It's frustrating. It's weird because and I think you see it in every sport. There are owners who just don't care. They're just there to play with their toy, right? Just
Yeah.
there to
Yeah, of course.
do the
I
thing.
hate that, by the way.
I do too, because you see it in the NBA, you see it in the NFL, but I don't know. You think that getting into the playoffs even and getting a playoff share would be incentive enough for these owners to be like, yeah, we'll be competitive, but I don't know. And I don't know if some of them just get jaded and they just are like, well, we can't pay our players, so nah. And maybe they
So
just
what do
need
we
better
care?
marketing teams. Yeah, maybe they just need better marketing teams that can market the players that they have.
Because it's definitely not as simple as Bob Costas is illustrating. And I know he's taken it section by section. Okay, let's talk about revenue sharing. That's step one. Okay, and then he gets into, okay, let's talk about player salaries. Because even in 99, he thought they were out of control, but he's turning over thinking about
Oh
how
yeah,
they're
I'm
going right
sure.
now.
Yeah.
Because what in 99, he said that it was what, like a couple million a year he was rolling his eyes at.
Yeah.
Now the
Yeah.
average annual value is in the 30s for the best
Yeah.
superstars in the
Yep.
league. So
Oh yeah, I don't think that he had even gotten to A-Rod's contract yet by the time this
mm-mm.
book was written.
No, and that's what I'm saying. So, yeah, because he talks about A-Rod being precocious in Seattle
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
as a middle infielder.
Right. And that's the thing that's funny too. That as I'm sitting here reading this, he's talking about, oh, the Mariners couldn't afford to pay Griffey and A-Rod, so Griffey got traded away and they're gonna have to let A-Rod walk. Well, months after this book was published, literally months, the Mariners went on to win 116 games with a bunch of guys you didn't know who they were.
Yeah,
Besides Edgar Martinez.
right.
You know? So I don't know. It's funny. That's one of the big things that my big takeaway so far with this book is that it has not aged well. I don't feel like.
I agree. So the question is then, he keeps going back and saying, I'm not an altruist. I'm not calling for these big socialist reforms. I'm not saying anything that would make a capitalist unhappy, et cetera, et cetera. All of these things, right? I'm not a romantic. I'm not calling for some return to the old ways when it was, when we were walking uphill both ways in the snow. He keeps saying things like that. But and then he keeps going and proposing things that kind of feel like he's contradicting himself.
Yes, very much so.
So, okay, so the purity of, and I think his heart's in the right place as I read this book. Every time I turn around, I think, yeah, okay, I see what you're saying. And at its face value, I don't disagree with him, right? Because the motivation for wanting to institute these changes makes a lot of sense. He's saying we can't have this disparity in what motivates teams to be successful. We can't have that. And this was way before tanking was even a thing. And he was already predicting it. He's saying we can't have fans showing up on opening day and realizing, oh boy, my team stands no chance. And they don't even care, which has become a very common narrative across baseball fans, depending on the market you're in, right? Depending on the team you root for. He saw that coming. So I think that's why I say his heart's in the right place and his motivation is pure. I just think the way he's going about fixing those maybe doesn't work under our new negotiative lenses. Like we can't do it that way.
Right.
Maybe we could have in 2000, but now it's not possible.
Right. And one of the things too that he talks about is, we talked about splitting the TV money. There's way too much of it to go around now. That A, they shouldn't have to, and B, nobody's going to want to.
Nobody's going to want to. That's 100% accurate.
Like I was looking at, so he had listed all 30 teams, and at the time of their TV deals, I think the Mariners were getting like $12 million a year for that deal at the time. I was like, oh my gosh, what a different time. But I was like, he was like, you just need to vote to get the teams to share their TV money. And I looked at the top 7 because you need 23 out of 30 votes, right, to pass things, as we learned from Samson. Those top 7 teams would never vote for that. They'd be all 7 of them losing way too much money.
Yeah,
no chance.
Well,
And I get that, like the way he frames it is like, you just got to get on board. It's like, Yeah, they got to get on board, but they're not going to because of how much money
Right.
they'd be losing.
Yeah. Well, and the way the things have gone now, like every team who can, I should say, has their own network because
Mhm.
they've swallowed up all of the capabilities. They don't want to share anything.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. The Mets, the Yankees, the Cubs. The Cubs have had their own network for, I mean, as long as we've
Forever.
been alive. You
Yeah.
know, and I don't know if the if the Braves are still on Superstation or TBS or whatever it is now because I don't have cable.
Right. I
But
don't either.
you know, but things like that, it's a whole different world. And the reason they do that, like you said, is because then they don't have to share money with anybody.
Right.
So
Yeah. I agree.
I don't know. It's
Anyway,
interesting.
it's been pretty interesting to read this far into the book. I'm excited to see what comes next, um, because there's more to come. So we're going to read chapters. Let's see, 7, 8, and 9 before the next one. Would we have that scheduled for 2 weeks out, Brad?
Yeah, let's do 2 weeks.
Okay, 7, 8, and 9. We're going to read. So chapter 9 starts on 115, so that'll give us, about 50 or so pages.
Okay. Sweet deal. Let's do it. But baseball family, let us know what you think. As always, jump in the mailbag, let us know, or comment on YouTube. We always see those.
Yeah, it's a good
Let us know what
place.
you're thinking about this book or some of your ideas about the things that we've shared with you about what Bob Costas is talking about in here. But you can always jump in the mailbag. Like I said, there's a link in the description of every episode or on baseballtogether.com. There's a link in the navigation.